In various videos I've uploaded to this site, one of the main running themes that I've touched upon is that Nintendo is not only not, in fact, innovative and unique like many people say they are, but they've also been making the same exact game over and over again while failing to actually innovate where it matters. Now, many people might be wondering why Nintendo does this. Now, recently an interview came out with the person who used to work at Nintendo. The person? Dan Adelman. The person who Nintendo tried to censor from tweeting and using Twitter. Why? Well, apparently he was tweeting some stuff that went against Nintendo's policy, such as stuff with region locking, something that has been a very touchy subject among Nintendo fans. However, he did do a bunch inside Nintendo, such as bringing higher profile indie games such as World of Goo and Cave Story to Nintendo's own platforms. Now, however, he no longer works for Nintendo, and ever since he left Nintendo, even though he has no hard feelings toward them, he has been critical of many of their decisions, such as the Wii U name, and he actually criticized how the name actually possibly cut sales in half. Just a few days ago, though, he interviewed Emily Rogers, a Nintendo fan writing for the website Dromble.com. And well, a lot of her articles have been critical on Nintendo, even though she's a fan of them. For example, the whole GameCube article, which pretty much criticized and explained why the GameCube was a flop, sales-wise, and even got outsold by the new Xbox, which was a new system at the time, as Microsoft had not made any system before it, and of course the original Xbox was not a well-known household name brand like the 360 was. But, like I said, taking a look at this person's background and Twitter profile reveals they are indeed a Nintendo fan. I know I shouldn't have to be saying this, but considering how various people on this website will instantly get critical if the website or article isn't instantly praising everything Nintendo does, I thought I might as well throw that out there. I mean, how many times have you seen people accuse people of being Call of Duty fanboys just for playing one game that is a Call of Duty, or not even playing Call of Duty but just disliking Nintendo games? But that's another story. I'm going to get to the article now. So before the interview starts, it starts off talking about where he worked. First, he worked with Microsoft and helped them score multiple third-party deals such as Knights of the Old Republic and WWF Raw, and also helping launch Xbox Live Arcade. He later worked at Nintendo from 2005 to 2014, helping launch WiiWare, DSiWare, the 3DS Wii U eShop, and bringing games such as World of Goo, the Bit Trip series, Shovel Knight, Super Meat Boy, Cave Story, and the like to the system, while also bringing Unity, which is pretty much the Unreal Engine of indie games this generation, to the Wii U. And trust me, Unity is a big thing this gen, considering how every single indie game uses it, just like how every single big budget game, and even smaller budget game, used the Unreal Engine 3 from at least 2006 to about 2012-13, I guess. And after the whole thing with the Twitter censoring happened, he left Nintendo and became a freelance consultant for indie game developers. So the interview begins first by bringing up his past with the companies, and then it asks him what he thought caused the fall of the Wii U. Of course, with third parties, that is. And the first thing he responds with is what me and many others have been saying about Nintendo's fanbase for a while. They buy Nintendo systems for the first-party games. And that's literally it. Because publishers aren't going to throw money down, according to him, on a system where people don't buy the games. And while he mentions that there are some exceptions, such as Rayman Legends, he says that many times third-party publishers will set low sales projections, and then a budget will be based on that. He also says he can't say outright that they're wrong either, as there have been cases where companies decide to pull out the stops and make a great game for the Wii U or Nintendo platforms only to find out that consumers weren't interested. I'm talking about stuff like Ubisoft or Need for Speed on the Wii U. He also mentioned that it could have been because consumers were burnt by third-party games on Nintendo platforms before, and I think he's referring to the Wii, because the GameCube did have games on par with the competition, but they still sold like crap. He does, however, say for Nintendo to break the cycle, that they should invest and absorb some of the risk for third parties who try to embrace the features of Nintendo's consoles and help communicate to consumers which games are on par with their first party games in terms of quality. And Sony and Microsoft spend a lot of money on exclusives or exclusive features and on the top games too, which Nintendo doesn't do because third parties focus on the other systems, as Nintendo never throws any money at them. He also says that Microsoft does have teams of technical people who will go work for studios for a few weeks or even months to help developers optimize everything about their said system. And while he says he doesn't know anything about Sony in that, I have heard that Sony did the same thing with the PS3 when developers were struggling with that system. And yet he doesn't say anything about Nintendo doing that because Nintendo does not spend very much money on securing third-party games. And he says that if Nintendo does not want to be a first-party only system like they are now, they may need to be more aggressive in securing those games and making sure that they're high quality. And he's kind of right. I mean, what were the big third-party exclusives last year on the Wii U? There was Bayonetta 2, but Bayonetta 2 was a niche game, and it didn't sell very well. And what about Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric? Oh wait, that game is a joke. At least the 3DS has it better with Monster Hunter and Shin Megami Tensei, but Shin Megami Tensei is not selling too well on the 3DS. And while Monster Hunter is, it's because Monster Hunter is literally Japan's Call of Duty. Outside of Japan, Monster Hunter is not as big as it is in Japan. And what's upcoming from third parties on the Wii U? Devil's Third? You mean generic PS2 era shooter game? I mean, it looks like one of those. I mean, it really does. Down to the unremarkable gameplay and crappy graphics. But anyways, let's talk about the next question. The next question he was asked was about third parties and power. Now the next question I think is actually pretty relevant considering how the whole graphics don't matter debate from 2007 is still going on with the Wii U. And the question is about, have you ever gotten the feeling that it would be easier to convince third-party companies to develop for the Wii U and 3DS if they were more powerful? And did you personally wish that they had been more powerful? For example, the 3DS does not currently support Unity and Web Framework, which makes it harder to attract indies to it. And he replied saying it would definitely be easier if only because publishers would not have to set up a separate development team just for the Wii U or 3DS version. He also said if you ask any developer what they want, they'll always say more RAM, faster CPU, faster GPU, just more power. And it's always the case with any system, even the next-gen systems. And of course, he would have loved Unity working on the 3DS because of how it's literally used in every indie game. But let's be honest here, he really has a point. Even though there are various people online trying to defend the Wii U's power, saying how graphics don't matter, here's the thing. It directly affects games, because developers aren't going to waste more money on a system with a small install base that has outdated hardware compared to the other systems. And trust me, developers and publishers will spend more money on supporting an outdated or underpowered system if it has an install base. I mean, look at the PlayStation 2. That system lasted so long that every console maker, except for Nintendo, wanted their system to be the next PlayStation 2. In fact, you can still buy 360s and PS3s, and the 360 is nearly 10 years old now. And yet the original Xbox lasted only 4 or 5 years before being discontinued. But at the same time, look how many people are buying Xbox Ones and PS4s, and that's why every developer is trying to jump to them faster than ever. His next question was about DLC and the Wii U versions of games, and he replied with the fact that DLC usually attaches at a fixed rate for active players, and usually will vary from game to game, but within a game it's pretty consistent. So if only so many players buy the DLC, as time goes on and the game gets older and older and the player count declines, so will the sales of the DLC in a very proportional way. And given the Wii U had a low install base, it wasn't worth porting it to the Wii U, especially when some games had completely different engines for the Wii U versions. The next question is real big though. He talked about in other interviews how hard it was to get stuff changed at Nintendo. For example, in one interview saying he tried to fight internally for change whenever he could, and in another interview saying it was hard to get changes that he wanted because nobody could hear him over the ringing of all the cash registers. But then he was asked why it was so hard to do that. And well, he replied with the fact that it's not only based in Japan, but it's also Kyoto based, which means that according to their company hierarchy, everyone is an advisor and no one is a decision maker, but nearly everyone in the company has veto power. And even Iwata himself is often loath to make a decision that will alienate some executive, so to get anything done, it requires a lot of groundwork, as in talking to different groups, securing their buy-in, and using that buy-in to get others to support their idea. And it's even worse if it's at a subsidiary, because first they have to get through it at Nintendo of America or Nintendo of Europe, and then all over again at main Nintendo in Japan, which can take a lot of time, and if someone says no, like just one random person, it's pretty much dead. So basically, big ideas don't get through unless it originates at the top. But another big problem is that, well, with Nintendo, a lot of the senior executives at the company were big during the early Nintendo and Super Nintendo days and don't really understand modern gaming. So adopting things like online, account systems, friend lists, along with understanding the rise of stuff such as PC gaming, and of course their competition, has been very slow. And ideas often get shut down because some people with the power to veto it simply don't understand it. And of course, at the same time, there's been very little reason to push these ideas, as risk-taking at Nintendo is not really rewarded. Long-term loyalty is what gets rewarded. So the best path at Nintendo is to stay the course. And instead of, like, encouraging people to innovate, they pretty much want people to do the same exact thing with their current culture. But outside the company, is it really paying off? Well, let's be honest here. Take a look at the Nintendo fanbase right now and the people buying Nintendo systems. A lot of the people are either kids whose parents buy it because that's the only brand they know, and also people who are literally trapped in the past and hate change. Because those are a lot of people I see buying Nintendo products, are people who you could literally sell a PlayStation 2 with the new logo on it, and they'd happily buy it like it's the savior of gaming. I mean, they really would. I mean, have you ever noticed all those kids these days, gamers, playing their Wii U instead of an Xbox One or PS4? And if they PC game, literally the only PC games they'll play are retro indie platformers? But that's another story. Let's go to the next question. Well, actually, I'll just skip to the relevant ones because many of them aren't that interesting to talk about. The next question was about how many indie games have never been featured on the Wii U's eShop front page. And when he worked at Nintendo, how did they decide which indie games should or shouldn't appear on the front page? And he was told that there was a very limited opportunity to feature anything on the WiiWare and DSiWare generation due to the fact that the shop was designed in a way where it was laid out based on sales, where if a game was top seller, it was the first game people saw and therefore most likely to be bought. And if you weren't one of the top 5 for a newly released game, you'd sink to the bottom and it would be hard for people to find the game. Even if you were like out looking for the game, it would be hard to find because they might not know exactly how it's spelled or even how to search on the Wii shop. Now, of course, on the 3DS and Wii U generation, a new team was set up to handle the layout. And they didn't report to him, so there was disagreement on what should have been featured. And that team was focused on driving revenue. And Nintendo's first party games were the ones that drove the most, so for a long time that was all you saw. And even though it was slightly getting better to him, it still had a ways to go. And of course, for him, the main criteria on which games should be featured was pulled into different marketing opportunities, whether it was recommending them for a prime spot on the eShop store page or including them in a booth at E3. And of course, it was a combination of innovation and quality. And he thought of it as in terms of people trying to do something new deliberately. Sometimes not succeeding, but he wanted to support their efforts always. Now, the question after that was asking about how the Wii U eShop was raising tough questions about quality control, with the Nintendo Web Framework being mentioned and called out for the increase in low-quality games. And he was asked if it was living up to its full potential, and does making it too accessible lead to shovelware and poor games? As keep in mind, with the Wii U eShop, it's become notorious for games such as The Letter or Meme Run. And he replied saying it was a tough issue and one that he personally went back and forth in on a lot. And on one hand, because the barriers to entry were so low, it was hard to sift through a lot of crap to get to the good games. And of course, there was also not an insignificant cost associated with running each game through the approval process, so they lose money on games that don't sell well. But on the other hand, there's the question on who decides which games are good enough, and deciding on how high or low you make the bar could lead you letting in lots of shovelware, or you rejecting a game like Minecraft, which ended up becoming a smash hit. And of course, the person who started the interview said he probably would have rejected Minecraft if he didn't get it at first. But in the end, he says it all comes down to discoverability. And if the eShop or any other platform can make it easy for people to find games that they like, then there's no problem with letting in lots of crap because people won't even see it. The problem is that technology doesn't exist, and Valve is trying to tackle this problem head on with some stuff such as the forums, the reviews, the Steam critters, but as can be seen right now with Steam currently, it's pretty evident they have not solved it yet. And of course, the most obvious sign of this is that the biggest factor in driving sales on Steam is still discounts. And if people still didn't feel the need that they were taking a big risk every time they bought a game, there wouldn't be as big of a need for 90% off sales on Steam. So in the end, this was an interesting interview that pretty much exposes that Nintendo has a lot of problems at the core of the company with regards to how they manage their online and of course their eShop and of course getting third parties on their systems. Very crucial things that eventually need to be addressed because eventually those old gamers who are hyping Nintendo up aren't going to be around for them anymore. And Nintendo is going to have to keep attracting new audiences. I mean, just look at their sales and how they're dipping. I mean, look at how well the Wii U sold compared to the Wii. Or how well the 3DS sold compared to the DS. Even though the 3DS has been selling respectable numbers, it sold less than the DS did in the same time period. That's not a good thing. And all in all, this just reinforces what everybody on this site, in this community, has been saying about Nintendo. They need to change. And if they don't change, they're going to end up irrelevant like many other companies have in the past when they could not adapt to change and what happens when technology changes. And while those companies didn't have the advantage of a huge fan army, they also had to deal with market realities too, just like what Nintendo is having to do. And that's all that really needs to be said. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more.